Just a quick disclaimer. I usually try to make these videos suitable for all ages. I don't tend to swear or anything, and I keep it nice and clean so you can show it to your grandparents. This video is probably like PG or 12 rated or something, as we delve into some thoroughly silly subject matter. Statistically speaking, you're probably in your late 20s or early 30s, so you'll be fine. But I just felt I should say up front. Alright, on with the show. Hello everyone, and welcome back to another special episode of the history of Magic the Gathering, told through a card from every set. Today we're going to be talking about the Unsets. Released in August of 1998, Unglued was a unique set containing 88 comical cards that operated slightly outside of the standard rules of Magic. The fact these cards were joke cards, not meant for organised play, was indicated by the fact they had a silver border around them. Unglued was a cult hit, and gave many Magic players a great laugh, lovingly poking fun at the game. The set was followed up in 2004 by Unhinged, which was a bit less successful, for reasons we'll dive into later on. After Unhinged, players were left waiting 13 years for the next Unset, which came out in 2017. Unstable was one of the best-selling supplemental products of its time, and made the joke format popular again. It was followed up by Unsanctioned, a unique little boxed product in 2020, and then by Unfinity in 2022. Unfinity did away with the silver border, and was generally a contentious set, but we're leaping ahead of ourselves. Let's get on with the history of Magic's Unsets. Some of these joke sets really landed, and some of them fell completely flat. Let's jump in. Unglued was unleashed upon the world in August of 1998. More than possibly any other Magic the Gathering product, the Unsets are the passion projects of the game's current head designer, Mark Rosewater. But the original concept for a silver-bordered set came from two other men. In his podcast on the development of Unglued, Rosewater records that Joel Mick and Bill Rose approached him with an idea. Mick and Rose were two leading designers at Wizards of the Coast at the time. They had both been members of the original University of Pennsylvania playtest group that helped Richard Garfield work on Alpha. The two men told Rosewater that they wanted to develop a unique set with no rules. According to an article Rosewater wrote on the subject, the exchange went like this. Bill Rose: how would you like to design a Magic set with no rules? Mark Rosewater: what do you mean? Bill: imagine there was a set where you could break any rule you wanted to. In fact, imagine a set where every card had to break a rule, where no card could not break a rule. It would be non-tournament legal. Rosewater was intrigued by this concept and went away to mull over the idea in his head. He eventually came to the conclusion that this novelty rule-breaking set would work best as a humorous parody product, poking fun at the game's history and the tropes that it frequently employed. Allegedly, Rosewater's decision to make a comedy set was inspired by a novel deck of playing cards he saw in a magic store. That's magic like stage magicians pulling rabbits out of hats magic. Not magic like Magic the Gathering magic. Rosewater had been a magician himself when he was younger, and he remembered a specific deck of playing cards where every card had a unique gimmick. For example, one might be a 9.5 of clubs, or a card in the heart suit but with a black colour scheme rather than a red one, or a card which would be half a jack and half a king. Just like this old set of playing cards, Rosewater wanted to design a set where every single card would have a unique gimmick. And so, Rosewater got to work. While he invited the rest of his colleagues to pitch in with any jokes or ideas they wanted on cards in the set, Rosewater was the sole designer and developer working on it. He has described Unglued on several occasions as his baby. This baby was brought into the world at a special pre-release event at Gen Con 1998. Rosewater commemorated the day by dressing up in a chicken costume and acting as the head judge for a special Unglued tournament. Unfortunately, this chicken costume was exceedingly dusty, and wearing it gave him bronchitis, but curiously, the chicken outfit is not the strangest clothing-related story from the pre-release.
In fact, here's where I knew I had made a mistake. I'm walking down, and I hear the following. The first person says, okay, I attack you. And the second person goes, wait. In response to your declaration of attack, I remove my pants. And I'm like, uh-oh. So, Hurloon Wrangler, which has Denim Walk, one of the things I was trying was I wanted to make some simple cards. And so one of the ways to do that was to take basic abilities like Land Walk and just tweak them a little bit. And so I was thinking like, well, what is a common occurrence that might happen? Like, oh, your opponent might be wearing jeans. It never dawned on me, I swear, as God is my witness, it never dawned on me that people would take off their pants.
This pants story illustrates the unique nature of unsets and their dual purpose. As well as comedy, the The other reason why unsets exist is that they're supposed to be a laboratory, a silver-bordered breeding ground for innovative ideas that might be incorporated into the game in future. Well, silver-bordered until recently at least. While we haven't yet seen any mechanics incentivizing players to strip, there are a huge number of cards in Unglued that heralded future directions the game would move in. For example, many cards in Unglued involve rolling a die, like Chicken a la King and Clam I Am. Dice rolling was something which, at this time, Wizards of the Coast actively avoided incorporating into Black Border Magic. But Plane Chase in 2009 added in a planar die, which could be rolled. And finally, dice rolling broke out of supplemental formats and entered Standard with the release of Adventures in the Forgotten Realms in June of 2021. This shows how a mechanic that was initially confined to unsets eventually broke out into the mainstream. There were several other innovations which also debuted in Unglued. This was the first set where the packs contained tokens and full art lands. There are even some cards which are almost one-to-one translations from silver bordered into black border magic, including the card that we're going to use to represent Unglued, the Cheese Stands Alone. For 6 mana, 2 of which must be white, the Cheese Stands Alone is an enchantment, which allows its controller to win the game if it's the only card they have in play and they have no cards in their hand. 9 years later, in 2007, this effect was printed on the black border card Barren Glory in Future Sight. While the effect was made to trigger at the beginning of the upkeep, rather than simply whenever it would become relevant, it is, broadly speaking, the same card. So, the Cheese Stands Alone demonstrates how unsets blaze the way with design ideas that initially seem strange and abstract, but are later on comfortably incorporated into the game. This is why I've chosen it as my card to represent Unglued. Well, that and its smile. That cheesy, cheesy smile. 6 years after the release of Unglued, in November of 2004, Unhinged was unveiled. It's clearly the worst designed of all 4 of the unsets. And those aren't my words, those are Mark Rosewater's. This self-deprecating quote comes from Lessons Learned Part 1, a March 2023 article where Rosewater discusses all of the sets he either led or co-led the design of. Personally, I disagree a bit here, and I feel that Unhinged is actually the second worst unset of all time. But what makes Rosewater feel that Unhinged is such a weak set? Well, there are 2 primary reasons. The first is that its sense of humour is, well, it's just a bit juvenile. Some of the best jokes in unsets are the cheesy puns and the clever little winks and nods to Magic's history that are sprinkled through. Unhinged has jokes about butts. Anyway, Donkey Tribal was a theme, but all of the donkeys were hilariously called asses. So you had cards with names like Badass, Cheapass, Dumbass, and of course, Fatass. Haha, you see, it's funny, because the donkey has a very, very large bottom, and all those brown soily stains look like poop! But it's not just the ass donkeys. This set is filled with cheap little gags, from jokes about peeing yourself, to jokes about mages not being able to get it up, and of course there's the infamous card that depicts someone spanking the monkey. I mean, there's nothing inherently wrong with this sort of crass humour, but it just doesn't really suit the tone of Magic. To be fair, this is a criticism that Rosewater himself has acknowledged. On a podcast episode about the set, he states,
in retrospect, I mean, I kind of feel like Magic's a little better than that. Like, that style of humor. I mean, there's people who obviously enjoyed it, and, I mean, it was fun, but I feel that, like, I don't know, it wasn't really Magic's sensibility, that it was a little, I mean, I love unsets, I think unsets have a really good place in Magic, but I feel like, we kind of lowered the humor a little bit more than we needed to, and I felt that didn't work out great.
The biggest problem of Unhinged, though, is the gotcha mechanic. A mechanic so bad that Rosewater described it as one of the worst mechanics I've ever made, in the article we cited earlier. Laughing Hyena, the card we'll use to represent the set, demonstrates why gotcha is such a maligned mechanic. So, cards with gotcha come back from your graveyard to your hand whenever an opponent does a specific thing. Many of them are triggered by your opponent saying a word, like Spell Counter, which returns to your hand whenever an opponent says spell or counter. Others are triggered by actions like touch and go, which lets you gotcha your opponent when they touch their face. Laughing Hyena triggers when your opponent laughs. This is hugely problematic because it's a card which punishes your opponent for laughing, which is included in a joke set designed to make both players laugh and have a good time. There's a fundamental contradiction in the design here. To cite Rosewater's Lessons Learned article again, when designing a mechanic, or a card, or a theme, or a game component, you must think about what you're incentivizing in the gameplay. The correct way to play Gotcha was to shut down the opponent. Don't talk, don't laugh, don't interact. You can see what the designers were going for here. They want players not to be taking unhinged games too seriously, and for the gotcha mechanic to enable some fun little gotcha moments, as the name implies. Ooh, you flicked your cards! Gotcha! I get my copy of Stop That back! Ooh, you just said the word life! Gotcha! I get my copy of Save Life back! Haha, what fun! The problem is that we're all Magic players, and optimising strategies is in our blood, and the optimal way to win an unhinged game is just to play in total silence. Just mutely tap on your opponent's creatures when you target them with removal spells, because otherwise you may trigger their kill destroy. Don't say the words creature or damage, or any numbers, because those will all trigger other gotcha effects. And don't you dare laugh, or those hyenas will be all over you. Unstable was unsealed in December of 2017. For those keeping track, that's 13 years after Unhinged came out, and almost 20 years since the release of Unglued. Rosewater makes no secret of the fact that despite the unset being his babies, the first two weren't exactly huge commercial successes. Rosewater and his team actually designed Unstable without it getting officially greenlit. They'd been working on the set since 2010, but only received permission to release it 7 whole years later. Unstable is very, very different from the 2 silver bordered sets that preceded it, in that, to quote Rosewater's excited announcement of the set, it's all the fun of a silver bordered set, but with a modern design sensibility and a cohesive creative treatment. While Unglued and Unhinged were both eclectic collections of joke cards and gags, Unstable was actually designed to be drafted. The set features factions, archetypes, and even lore. Unstable takes place on the plane of Bablovia, a madcap realm of mad science and misadventure. Every allied colour pair is associated with a different kind of scientific wackiness. There's the Order of the Widget in white and blue, who are rules-obsessed cyborgs that keep trying, and typically failing, to optimise and improve themselves. There's the blue/black Agents of Sneak, an organisation of gadget-wielding spies with an acronym in their name that has 6 different interpretations. And the black and red League of Dastardly Doom, a team of supervillains who lampshade every single stock comic book baddie cliché. There are the red and green Goblin Explosioneers, so as the name implies, are goblins who love explosions, and finally, the white/green Crossbreed Labs, who are a commune of Selesnya-coloured scientists that splice themselves together with different animal parts. Unstable features 2 marquee mechanics, both of which take advantage of the silver-bordered rules-breaking nature of the set to be truly wacky and wild without getting too out there. There's Host and Augment, and then there are Contraptions. Rosewater credits the set's artistic director, Dawn Murrin, for bringing both of these mechanics to life. So full appreciation to her for the invaluable work she put into making this set what it is. Let's go over both of those mechanics in turn. Host cards look like this. They're creatures with the Host supertype, and an adjective in their name, and an Enter the Battlefield ability as well. Their artwork depicts them with both halves of their bodies divided by a steampunky pipe thing. Augment cards, meanwhile, are creatures with no mana cost. Instead, you cast them for an augment cost, combining them with a host card in play and sliding them together so their artworks line up. The augmented card not only provides a statistical buff to the host, but also changes what triggers the host's ability, so it can happen again. You can make a half shark, half rat that causes your opponent to discard a card during each of your upkeep steps, or a serpentine camel that gives creatures you control +1/+1 whenever you play a land, or a half kitten, half kitten that causes you to gain 1d6 of life whenever you take damage. As a demonstration of how unsets lay the groundwork for future design innovations, you can see that in many ways, Host and Augment cards serve as a predecessor to the Mutate mechanic introduced in 2020's Ikoria Lair of Behemoths. Just like with Augment, you're combining a creature in your hand with one in play in order to get additional ability triggers and a big old powerful merged threat. Contraptions, meanwhile, are a new artifact subtype. Every Unstable pack contains 2 contraptions, but rather than putting them in your main deck, they instead go into a contraption deck by the side. Every player has 3 sprockets, and whenever they use a card that tells them to assemble a contraption, they reveal the top card of their contraption deck and load it into a sprocket of their choice. Every upkeep, all of the contraptions in one of a player's sprocket get cranked. In other words, its ability activates, and then the player's crank counter moves on to the next sprocket in the queue. For example, let's say it's your upkeep, and your crank counter is in sprocket 1. So you crank it, activating the contraption's arms deposit and division table, which are also in that sprocket. One of your creatures gains 2+1+1 counters from your arms depot, and then target opponent loses 2 life from your division table. Then, at the start of your next upkeep, you move your crank counter onto sprocket 2, ready to activate the contraptions loaded there. Once you pass sprocket 3, you loop back around and return to sprocket 1. Contraptions are interesting, as they provide you with the option of going either wide or going tall. Do you want a huge number of effects to trigger once every 3 turns, or a smaller smattering of different effects that happen every turn? Maybe contraptions are a bit convoluted, but you'll never see them outside of Unstable. They're just a unique gimmick for this set and this set alone. The card which we're going to use to represent Unstable assembles contraptions. Additionally, just like Lightning Bolt, our M10 pick, its first printing wasn't in the set it represents. We're going with Steam Flugger Boss as our card to represent the set. Steam Flugger Boss is the only non-land black border card in Unstable. Steam Flugger Boss was initially released as a future-shifted card in Future Sight in 2007. Future-shifted cards, as I described in part 7 of this series, are cards which came out in Future Sight, but were allegedly pulled into the set from the future. Many, though not all of these cards, would later be released as the game's life continued. Aven Mind Sensor, for example, came out in Amonkhet. Steam Flugger Boss is a 4-mana 3/3 Goblin Rigger that gives all of your other Riggers +1/+0 and haste, and causes them to assemble 2 contraptions whenever they would assemble 1. Back in 2007, this paragraph of rules text was meaningless mush. Aaron Forsythe, Magic's head developer at the time, admitted as much, but 10 years later, in its own silver-bordered way, contraptions transformed from a deliberately convoluted concept to a genuine card type, albeit a silver-bordered one. Any concerns that Magic's designers initially had about unsets being unprofitable were thrown out of the window with the release of Unstable. While we don't know the exact sales figures, in his State of Design 2018 article, a sort of annual look back on what has and hasn't worked for Magic in a given year, Rosewater writes, Unstable had 3 printings and looks like it's going to be one of the best-selling non-Masters supplements of all time. Apparently some of us enjoy a little silliness in our Magic, and yes, this greatly increases the chances of a 4th unset. We would see that 4th unset in due course, but first of all, we'd have a whole new strange unproduct to play with. Unsanctioned was unearthed in February of 2020. Unsanctioned isn't really a full-on unset, it's a box containing 5 30-card half decks, 1 for each colour. 2 players take 2 half decks each and shuffle them together, and then play them against each other. If you've ever played Jumpstart or Paul Peterson's Smash Up, you know the idea. Unsanctioned is a bit strange, and honestly, I was tempted to skip over it, but the set does contain 16 brand new silver-bordered cards, so I felt I needed to give it a mention. Unsanctioned contains 6 legendary creatures, 2 in green and 1 in every other colour. They're fun designs, but strangely, apart from Surgeon Commander, they all have off-colour activated abilities, so if you're going to be playing with Unsanctioned, you should aim to mix together 2 enemy-coloured decks. This will guarantee you'll be able to use the ability of exactly 1 of your 2 legendary creatures without needing to rely on Underdome, the one fixing land that can be found in every one of these decks. The card that I'm going to choose to represent Unsanctioned is Rings a Bell, which, while perhaps not as iconic as the legendary creatures from this set, especially not as iconic as Alexander Clamilton, Rings a Bell demonstrates that Wizards of the Coast have learned a valuable lesson. For 4 mana, 2 of which must be blue, Rings a Bell is an enchantment. When it enters play, its controller chooses a word with 4 or more letters. The first time its controller says that word each turn, their opponent has 5 seconds to ring a bell, or failing that, to imitate the sound of a bell ringing. If the opponent forgets, then Rings a Bell's controller draws a card. You'll recall that when we were discussing Unhinged, we talked about how the gotcha mechanic was a failure, as it punished players when they tried to talk, incentivising players looking to win to remain absolutely silent whilst playing a set that was supposed to be comical. Rings a Bell flips this on its head, and instead rewards the player who cast it for speaking, encouraging chat and mirth and jokes. You've also got to be a bit tactical with this. If you try to say a word every single turn, your opponent will wise up and keep ringing that bell, meaning you end up drawing no cards at all. You've got to slip it by, saying the word regularly enough that it can potentially be missed, and you can get some card draw, but not so regularly that it becomes obvious and apparent, and your opponent interrupts you every time. Even now, 4 years later, you can still grab Unsanctioned for about its launch price, or at least you can here in the UK. To go completely into my subjective opinion, however, Unsanctioned is fun enough, but the wackiness wears out quite quickly. It would have had a lot more replay value if the box came with more half decks to mix together, a request that I don't think's unreasonable considering the box's price tag. Maybe they could have made them based around themes, like host and augment, rolling dice, squirrels, etc., rather than around the colours, to open up more space. I also feel like it's a bit stingy that they only put 10 full art land cards in the box, rather than making every land full art. I also think putting Booster Tutor in the black deck isn't a great move. Booster Tutor makes you crack a magic booster and add a card from it to your hand. This means this box isn't self-contained, and you're going to need to get your hands on a magic booster somehow, every single time you want to play with the black deck. This is very awkward if you're playing the game at home and don't have a spare pack lying around. And even if you're playing at your local game store, having to potentially shell out extra cash every time you play the black deck isn't fun. I wrote a lot more than I thought I would to discuss Unsanctioned, but our next set is one with no shortage of talking points. For better, or for worse. Unfinity came out in October 2022. I can't think of any more synonyms for release that begin with un, alright? Even prior to its release, Unfinity caused controversy by bringing an end to the silver border. The original Unglued was designed with the mission statement that every single card should break a rule in some way, making every card in the set ineligible to be played in regular Magic. Unfinity cards, meanwhile, can instead be divided into two types, those which work in regular Magic and those which don't. Whether a card falls into the former or the latter category is distinguished by the stamp on the bottom of the card. Cards with either no stamp or the regular Magic holofoil stamp are legal for use in Vintage, Legacy, Pauper and Commander. Cards with an acorn stamp are illegal in all non-joke formats. Regrettably, quality control at Wizards of the Coast was a bit lacking during the printing of this set. How uncharacteristic, I know. And there are reports of joke cards being printed without the acorn, and vice versa. By itself, this might not have caused a huge amount of contention, even if the motivations for doing this seem to be profit-driven, rather than driven by a desire to improve the gameplay experience. Singles from Unsets typically don't have a very high value on the secondary market. None of the cards from Unstable, for example, are worth more than $4. Making some of the cards from Unfinity usable game pieces in Commander is a move to ensure the packs retain value, and players who aren't typically interested in joke games have a reason to buy them. Borderless art fetch lands were also put in the set for this reason, as well as the inclusion of a multitude of different artistic and foil treatments, as is the standard for any Magic set these days. So while the blurring of the delineation between uncards and regular cards for reasonably clear to infer profit motives may have frustrated some players, it was the choice of which mechanics were made legal in regular Magic play that really riled people up. Unfinity features many acorn mechanics that are typical of Unsets, which could never exist in typical Magic play. For example, cards which care about the letters in the name of other cards couldn't be legal, as this would make the same cards in different languages distinct game pieces. For example, the card Jetpack Janitor has first strike when it's blocking or being blocked by a creature with a name that comes later in the alphabet than its own. This means that it would draw in combat against an English printing of the card Centaur Corsair, but it gains first strike and wins in combat against Zentaren Renner, the card's German printing. Cards which only care about art also can't be made a part of regular Magic, as they make different artistic treatments of cards distinct game pieces. Unfinity has a Hats Matter theme, demonstrated on cards like Brim's Barone, Midway Mobster. When Brim's Barone enters play, he puts a +1/+1 counter on every creature you control wearing a hat. This regular artwork of the card Aurelia Exemplar of Justice is wearing a helmet, so should get a +1/+1 counter. This special alternative anime artwork of Aurelia, meanwhile, this game is not wearing a hat, so she would not. These are far from the only reasons why certain mechanics can't be legal for regular play. There are lots of mechanics like this, though. Things which care about cards having attributes and properties which the regular rules of Magic the Gathering are unable to quantify. Or cards that require dexterity challenges, or cards that make you do goofy things, like shoving your head into your library. But which mechanics does Unfinity feature that are now part of the comprehensive rules of Magic? Well, there's rolling dice, but as we've discussed, that's far from novel and new these days. No, the two new divisive mechanics are attractions and stickers. Attractions, like contraptions before them, are a new artifact subtype that gets put into a separate deck at the start of the game. Many cards in the set encourage players to open an attraction. When you open an attraction, you take the top card from your attraction deck and put it into play. Every attraction has the numbers from 1 to 6 written on its right hand side, with some of the numbers lit up and others dimmed. Once you've opened an attraction, at the beginning of each of your main phases you roll a d6. You visit every attraction that has an illuminated number which matches the number you rolled, activating its effect. These effects range from creating a 1/1 robot clown, to bouncing an opponent's creature, to playing little mini-games, although these mini-games are only found on acorn-stamped attractions. Every attraction has the number 6 lit up, so if you roll a 6 you'll be getting lots of effects, all blasting out at once. Attractions are contentious for the same reason dungeons are contentious, in that they add a lot of complexity to the game and they rely on external components. Reading Complaints Clerk, even with the reminder text, doesn't explain what an attraction deck is or what it means to flip over the top card from it. While this was also true of contraptions, those cards were never meant for real play. But It is notable that all of the attractions and the cards which open them were very consciously designed not to be legacy playable, so they aren't going to cause much trouble for the competitive community. Maybe your friends will run the most dangerous gamer as their commander, and it will make the game a bit more convoluted, but that's not that bad, surely. Well, I guess your mileage might vary, but we'll put a little pin in the idea of attractions being complex, and we'll move on to discussing stickers. While attractions annoyed some people, it's the stickers that really rub people the wrong way. In a Lessons Learned article where he discusses the set, Rosewater acknowledges that the response to stickers was very polarised, and that a good portion of the audience strongly disliked them. So how do stickers work? Well, in the common slot of every Unfinity booster pack, there's a single sticker sheet. Every sticker sheet contains 3 name stickers that modify the name of the card they're stuck to, 3 art stickers that modify the card's artwork, 2 ability stickers that give the card new effects, and 2 power/toughness stickers that modify the stats of the creature. In Limited, you can just use all of the sticker sheets you draft, but in Constructed, you have to bring 10 different sticker sheets along to each of your games and then randomly select 3 to use. While name and art stickers can be put onto cards by any effect that instructs you to put a sticker on something, stickers that modify the power and toughness of cards or give them new effects require tickets. Tickets are a kind of counter/currency generated by many cards from Unfinity. So if you want to give your creature a really powerful ability, like Double Strike or Infect, you'll need to spend a handful of tickets. Finally, cards keep their stickers even when they transition to a different zone, like the hand, the command zone, or the graveyard. Whew. So, what about that makes them unpopular? Well, a part of it is simply because of how absolutely convoluted they are. Writing that explanation above gave me a bit of a migraine, and I'm still not sure I've done a great job explaining them. To look back and remove that pin, which I stuck in attractions being complicated earlier, the incredible complexity of Unfinity's 2 marquee mechanics carries some issues due to the set's humorous tone. When players sit down to play an unset, they want a light and jokey time, and you can't really do that with Unfinity. It's not possible to switch your brain off when you're constantly needing to track so many different variables. I'm aware this is entirely anecdotal, but during an Unfinity draft that I played, no one really laughed, but some players across the table from me did get into an argument over whether the clown wig that was stuck to a card in play meant it could now be destroyed with bar entry. Another reason why stickers are so unpopular is because of how fiddly they are. The stickers adhere well enough to cards the first time you apply them, but after several games you'll just have to resort to lightly resting them on top of your cards. It eventually became difficult to put them back onto the sticker sheet, which means there's a risk you'll lose them and they'll simply flutter off. There's also a few stories of stickers damaging etched foil cards, so that's no fun. Wizards did make a sensible decision though, in that stickers can only be put onto their owner's cards, so even if you use Act of Treason, you won't be able to apply any stickers to your opponent's creatures. If you want to play with stickers, it's only your own cards you risk damaging. The final reason why stickers are so unpopular links us to the card we've chosen to represent the set. Now, when I was discussing attractions earlier, I mentioned they were designed in such a way so that they wouldn't really be viable in Vintage, Legacy, or Pauper. This keeps the jokey mechanics out of real, serious Magic tournaments. While this was also the intention with stickers, it didn't quite work, and one lone card slipped through the cracks. Goblin, known to most players as Mind Goblin, because of a hilarious joke that you can ask your opponent if they Mind Goblin these nuts! Whatever you want to call this goblin, it's a 3-mana 2/2 that gets a name sticker placed on it when it enters play. It then generates a red mana for every unique vowel on that sticker. So for example, Guacamole Goblin would give you 4 mana, since guacamole contains a U, an A, an O, and an E. Repeated vowels don't get extra mana, so you just get 1 mana for every vowel showing up at least once on the sticker. Seething Song has long been a popular card in Storm decks. It ticks up your Storm count whilst giving you 2 more mana to play with. With the right combination of sticker sheets, this Mimi Goblin can function as a Seething Song with a 2/2 body. Hell, if you're lucky enough to get the sticker Delusionary, this card produces 1 mana more than Seething Song does, on top of granting you a gobbo. I won't bother going into the math of which stickers to pick, or how later plays of this goblin get diminishing returns as you gradually use up all of your best stickers. I won't even go into how this card just rolls a d20 when played on Magic the Gathering Online, because sticker sheets aren't programmed onto that system. I'll just say this goblin encapsulates everything that needs to be said about Unfinity. It's a convoluted gag that shouldn't be playable outside of jokey games, but inexplicably is. And that brings our discussion of unsets to an end, at least for now. It's a shame that after more than 25 years, things are ending on a bit of a sour note. I like putting out polls at the end of these videos, so I'll end this one with a poll as well. Would you like to see more unsets in the future? Honestly, personally I'm really not sure. I don't like that I had to get so negative in the last part of this video. Fundamentally, I love Magic, and I want to celebrate it. And Unglued and Unstable absolutely deserve to be commended for the wonderful, innovative inside jokes that they are. Even Unhinged was trying its best to make us laugh. But maybe that's the problem. Unsets were never meant to be more than a little knowing wink at the audience, a little acknowledgement from Wizards of the Coast that they're not taking themselves too seriously, and they're willing to play around with the rules and make a new way of playing that's wacky and wild and fun. Attempting to merge this sort of memey joke gameplay with black border magic was always going to ruffle some feathers. Cramming the set full of shocklands and special foiled treatments and viable eternal legal tournament cards makes it a more appealing financial purchase, but steps away from the purpose of Unsets. Wizards of the Coast aren't trying to joke around with us anymore. They're trying to sell us another product, perfectly optimised to capture as wide an audience as possible. And honestly, that's sort of what every set feels like these days. Geez, this is a bit of an unhappy ending, isn't it? Especially for what was supposed to be a light-hearted, comical video about the game's joke sets. I know. Let's go back and watch that montage of cards with butt jokes on them from Unhinged. Good night, everybody!